All right, thanks everybody. I know I'm between you and lunch, so I'll make this as quick as I can. DMN Technology Compatibility Kit, the second year. As Nathaniel said, this was 2 years ago, and there was a lot of discussion about decision model and notation. And I was making the point that if you're going to have a standard, you have to have something running, because the written paper is never enough. There are always problems in there that you won't find until you actually get it running. And Bruce looked at me, I think he's somewhere down in front there, and he says, well, Keith, are you going to start a working group on this? So I was in front of everybody and I had to say yes. So we did. The question is, what's the point of a standard if implementations execute differently? And that's what we wanted to test here, is that if you draw a DMN diagram and you give it a certain set of inputs, on every implementation you should get the same set of outputs. So that's what we set out to do and to show that. So the goals of the TCK, and it's kind of funny, we talk about the TCK as Technology Compatibility Kit. So technically, we're talking about a set of files, a set of resources that you can use, define a set of test cases. And we also talk about people joining the TCK. So it's funny, we also use TCK to mean the group of people that are developing this. But not to be confused, we're defining a set of test cases. We are carefully examining them to make sure that they conform to the spec. Then we're providing tools to run the tests, and for those vendors that do run the tests and provide their results to them, we are giving recognition to them for having done that and for executing the test correctly. So that's our goal. And some of you already know the structure of this, but let me go through it briefly. For the record, there's a couple different parts of what we're providing. At the bottom, this is what the TCK is providing. There's a number of things that will appear there. Those are files. Those are all files that are distributed under basically an open source license that are available to you. At the top is the vendor's engine. So that's what the vendor is supplying, the execution of the DMN. And in the middle is a runner. Now the runner is not necessarily part of the TCK. We do offer some examples, but they depend somewhat on the vendor's implementation. So if the vendor engine is in Java, you'll need a Java-based runner. But what the runner is doing is reading the file, submitting it to the engine. Now, the DMN models are in DMN standard format, so it's an XML format. We don't specify that. We take it exactly from the spec. If the spec changes, that'll change and move forward as well. But what we do define is a set of input data. These are individual test cases, and each test case provides a set of input values and a set of expected results. And what the runner does is it submits the input values, compares it to the expected results, and then outputs a simple CSV file of the results. And we take that CSV file and we make a website out of it. So that's it in a nutshell. The DMN TCK is a way for vendors to demonstrate their compliance, to provide files to help vendors test for errors to become compliant, and for customers to assess how compliant a vendor is. So I think this is very important for the health of DMN community overall. Well, let's go into a little bit more detail. So, of course, 2 years ago we started. Last year I was able to give a presentation, and we actually had the beginning of the website, and I've put here one vendor result. Maybe we had 2 or 3. It was a little harder to measure at that time, but today we do have 7 vendors with results there. Good solid results, and I'll show you what that website looks like. We've gone to 65 different test models. We have 677 decision objects in those, 62 test files, and each file has a number of cases in it, so we have 588 test cases. Not all of those cases are in the active set. Some of them are set aside as not being strictly compatible to the spec today. We're waiting for the version 1.2 of the spec to come out so that we can then bring those back, or maybe some things to be resolved. But anyway, we have 588 test cases. To give you an understanding of what it is that we do, this is the XML format of a DMN model, and you see there a decision, and you see the definition of the output. So this model is calculating yearly salary, And here's the input, the required input, and this is a reference to the definition, which is down at the bottom. So, okay, monthly salary goes in, yearly salary goes out. You're seeing types here. These are the field types. And the main thing that's being tested here is the field expression. So that's basically it. This is a model to multiply the monthly salary by 12. But the important thing is that the engine has to take in that expression, has to interpret that expression correctly and produce the right result. Now, we did a lot of talking about conformance level 1 and conformance level 2 and conformance level 3. And I think last year I showed a piece of paper that conforms to conformance level 1. So it's really not saying much to be conformance level 1. And level 2 is simplified field. But if you really want models to execute the same everywhere, you need to have the same expression language in there. And since the only standardized expression language, a lot of vendors have their own expression language that they want to put in there, but the only standardized one is field, we felt that it was an imperative that we have to basically test the full field implementation. So we're really looking at conformance level 3, and that's what customers are expecting, because they're expecting, I write a model here, it runs there, I get the same results. It's got to be that way. So this is what the test file looks like. It's really quite simple. First you say what the model is that's being tested. There's a set of labels. There can be any number of labels. These help us group the outputs into sets on the output site. That's pretty much all they are. The first one there, compliance level, is required. Nothing else is required. Some of these were generated by a script that Bruce wrote and went through and automatically pulled out certain aspects of it. But anyway, the labels help drive the display and the sets of the outputs. There's a test case. So this file can have any number of test cases, individual test cases. There's the input. There's the monthly salary input of 10,000 something or others. We assume dollars, I guess. And here's the output, again, 120,000. So notice that the value is a number, obviously. And how you might know that's a number, well, it looks like a number, and this was one of the issues that we came, and I'll talk about this in a moment, how we strictly define what that value is and how to interpret that value in the test. But that's all part of it. And so you can easily see that it'd be easy for a runner to pick this up and submit these values and get the thing, compare the results. So that's basically it. And we're asking people to write these, not only the DMN model, but also the test values that inputs and outputs like this. This is fairly straightforward, and based on this very, very simple framework, we can then produce this site. So this is a view of the site, and I will actually show you what the site looks like. So here it is, and you can go. I'll drill down on Red Hat here, so we can go look in and see what all the current tests are. So you can run through all of these tests, and the check mark here indicates whether they've passed them or not. And you can then look at the documentation for the particular test case itself, what it's trying to do. If the particular vendor has a fail at this point, you could go see what it is trying to test. And you can actually go and access the files themselves, the test case files, the DMN file itself. You can open that up. So basically everything you have to compare the different vendors, and it's a nice looking, so you get this overview here. Oracle's got a few of them in there. Oracle submitted last year. We're looking for an update on that. Trisotech has all of the results in here. So that's the results site, and we update it at the end of every month. And we try to restrict the changes to the test to the first half of the month, and then for the second half of the month, the vendors submit their results. Okay, so with that, I wanted to recognize the effort of a number of people, and it's really going to have to be Red Hat first. I don't know, a lot of you know this, that Edson, who's standing in the back there, did an incredible amount of work on this. So he really did a lot of the programming. He got the first runner working. He got the basic pieces in place. Bruce was very active on the beginning, and then Edson also programmed that nice website that you've got there. Now, I took these names from people who had committed to the repository, so Matteo and Tibor and Eder, and there may have been other people at Red Hat who worked on this, so I don't really know. But it's important to note that that's a tremendous effort there to make this all work. Also wanted to note Camunda, who was a founding member, and Falco worked with us a lot. Their approach was a little different than the strict by the book, but they did supply tests and have been very, very active in the community. Trissa took a course as well with the modeling side of it, very active in making sure that these tests are there and that good tests are running. And it's also worth mentioning that when Denis did his talk earlier, he talked about you can design your DMN model, and then you can design your inputs and your outputs, okay, and you can run tests, and then you can actually save them in this exact same format that I just showed you there. So what I'm hoping everybody will do is go and try to persuade Denis to add to his site a little button that says submit to TCK. So if we just had that, we could just have new tests there all the time. So we'll see what happens. And then Actico is an interesting one. They joined rather late. It was July of last year. They suddenly found out about us and said, wait a minute, we can do all this kind of stuff. So in about 2 weeks, they came up to speed. They had their runner written. And they were, I'd like to say, passing all the tests. That's not quite exactly the truth. The truth is that every time a new vendor joined the group, we found conditions that were wrong. Okay, either the test was written wrong or it wasn't, there were certain edge cases, and it's incredible. Every single time we'd have to go back to the spec, we'd have to examine it. Oh, is this really right? Is this really wrong? And every one of the vendors has benefited by that, because when we started looking at things like lists and nested lists, we found that people had interpreted the spec very, very differently, and we had to actually have these realistic cases there to be able to find out what our consensus was. And we take that back to the RTF, and we did submit a number of changes back to the RTF to say, hey, this has got to be addressed, this is fixed, this is ambiguous, this is not clear, this is wrong, and so we've done that. Other than those people mentioned, there's a number of others. I do want to definitely note Open Rules involvement. Goldman Sachs came in. They have an implementation. Also have been very active in helping us to find the right test cases. Oracle, of course, Gary's been involved. Bruce with Method and Style has been in there. So a lot of work by good people here. All right, so what were the top issues that we ran across? I mean, sort of the hindsight of the last couple of years. I mentioned earlier, the decision between feel support and not feel support. We have to have an expression language, so we have to go fully. There was a lot of discussion around nested lists because of this little snippet here, which I clipped from the spec. It basically says, hey, if you're expecting a list and you submit just a value to it, or the other way around, if you have a function that expects a value and you give it a list, but that list has one entry in it, anyway, a single value acts the same thing as a list with one value. And that produces some interesting things like this. We actually had a test case that had data value very much like this, considered these equal. Well, according to the spec, those two nested lists are equal. Because A is going to equal a list with just A in it and vice versa. And of course, that produces some interesting cases like this, where the number of different ways that this could be matched up, it starts to get to be really, really hard. So actually, this was an issue that went back to the RTF, and I don't know if the RTF has I know there's consensus among the people. I don't know if they've actually voted on it yet, but there is consensus that, in fact, it shouldn't be like this. It shouldn't be that it works everywhere, but that there's a certain case where you're doing filtering, and in that case you want those to be nice and fluid so that it's easy to write these expressions out. But when it comes down to the actual data, you want the data to be clearly typed one way or another. Now, what we did in the TCK for this is that we stepped aside and we sort of avoided this issue. We went back and recoded these tests so that the types were clear and so that the lists were consistent, had the same types across the thing. We've done that on a couple of cases, and we do that because we want to make sure that we're hitting the most important cases, the most common cases, and we're making it easy for people to join and provide some implementation that works. What we will need to do is probably go back and revisit some of these questionable cases, some of these edge cases that we've kind of avoided at this point. I mentioned the test values and automatically detecting the test values. If it's clearly a number, then you want a number there, but there are some cases where you have strings that look like numbers. So we had to allow the specification on the values of a XML schema type. So you can, if you want to, on the test values, say what type it is. We then hit an interesting case where we needed to test if a null was returned because, well, among other things, there are certain situations where functions return null. There's some cases where they turn an empty string. And if an error is thrown, the language is defined to return a null. So we needed a test for null, so we came around and we extended some way to test for null coming out of a test. That was quite important. And we also added a way to check if an error occurred during the processing of this model. Now, right now, it's not required that you report this. It turns out the spec doesn't have a standard way for reporting the errors. But we felt that it was important, if an error did occur, that there was some way that you could write a runner that would check to make sure that that error had been sent at some level. Oh, we found some problems with the date arithmetic and went through there. We found that you couldn't divide a duration by another duration. Seems like the kind of thing you'd want to do. It looked like a spec oversight. Submitted that back to the RTF and said, hey, please address this. Strings had no way to put special characters in it. You could put special characters in identifiers and some other things, but you couldn't put them into strings. So, just these little shortcomings of the spec, which we were able to, because we were testing and because we were actually running cases, we were able to find these and then report back. We found out that negative numbers can have a minus sign, but positive numbers cannot have a plus sign in front of it, So little edge cases like that. So what are we headed for in the next year, on the way to year 3? So we're waiting for DMN 1.2 to come out. We have a number of tests that we're holding back, waiting to test those cases when that new version of the spec comes out. And we will have to make a new copy of the test. So we'll have to keep the tests that we have now for the 1.1 level. We'll have to make a copy of everything, and then we'll start expanding that with new tests that can only run in 1.2. So we'll do that. We have not really done a lot of testing of error cases. For example, I'm pretty sure that all the DMN models have valid field expressions in them. We really should have a couple test cases that have invalid expressions, just have bad expressions in there, because engines need to handle that one way or another. But more importantly, functions that when you call them, they give you bad results, and so missing inputs, null inputs. So these are kinds of things that we need to go more in the future. We did avoid some trouble areas. We should maybe go back and take a look at those trouble areas and sort of add some tests in there to make sure that all the engines execute the same across the thing. But I think the real area where we'll move forward in the next year is on more real decision models. What do I mean by that? Well, so Pete Melrose has joined the group recently, and he is working currently in the health industry. And so he had a problem that he needed to express some way, to express a certain decision. And he had tried a couple other approaches. He found out about DMN. And so he's coding these up as DMN. And so this is about, looking at blood pressure and arterial pressure and a number of different categories, and then basically coming with an output. He has another model that then looks at whether the patient is septic or severely septic or in septic shock, and there's different actions that are required from that. And that flows into another table, again, with more values. Now, what I like about this is that because it's these really are the decisions, not because all of our other tests are hypothetical decisions or generated decisions by the vendors who are trying to exercise the expression engine. So they're trying to come up with things that make sure that the expressions work and all that kind of stuff. But is it a realistic, real model? This is a realistic, real model. This is real world. So I think Pete is going to donate these to the group, and we'll have a set of tests around it. And it's fairly easy to take any DMN model, bring it in there. You have a couple test cases. Maybe you use Denise's tool to come up with the test cases and the answers and verify that everything is running right. It's pretty easy to then submit that. And so that's basically my call to action here, my call for submissions. If you are creating DMN models, and I know a lot of you are, if they're valid and well-formed, okay, and if you've defined test cases, and you would like them, whoops, I hope it doesn't advance again, and you'd like them to execute on all the engines. I mean, who wouldn't? I mean, if you're going to invest the time in making a DMN model, I mean, you wouldn't want it to run differently. You'd like to make sure it ran on all the things. And you'd like to make sure that in the future versions of those, the future releases of those engines, that they remain running. So if you want to basically sort of guarantee some sort of future compatibility, then please submit them to the DMN TCK. And we will take them on, we'll add them to the test set, and then we will run them regularly. All the vendors will run them every month. And if anything changes that would affect your model, you know, it'll bubble up. Now I say it's a guarantee for compatibility. Of course, it's not a guarantee. They may make an incompatible change in the future. It may happen. But at least with your test case being in there, we're going to know about it, and we will have discussed it. It's not going to happen accidentally. It's not going to creep up on anybody, but it'll be highly visible when we make a change that's incompatible. All right, well, so that's basically it. The high-level summary. The DMN TCK is a way for vendors to demonstrate their compliance to the standard. We provide files to help vendors test for errors and become compliant. I could add a little bit on that, which it was very satisfying to hear that when Comundo went back and did a re-implementation of the engine, they started with the TCK tests, and they started with those tests, a test-first design, and they were able to immediately verify that their implementation was matching that. And I also wanted to mention that Actico joined us, and in 2 weeks, you know, they came up to speed on it, but then they came back and said, hey, we've got these hundreds of tests here that we've been using. Let me bring that out and put it into the TCK format, and then everybody can run these tests. So we are actually very thankful that Actico did do that. And finally, it's a way for customers to assess how compliant a vendor is. That's all I got for you. Bruce.
So I'd like this is more a comment and address to Neil, Jim, Sandy, and other people analysts who sort of popularize what's happening in decision management. There are 7 vendors in the TCK. There are probably a couple dozen vendors that claim to support DMN. Okay. My position is, you know, if you really support DMN, it's not just feel that you're checking; it's all the boxed expressions, which is more than decision tables.
Yep.
So if you really support DMN, you're going to be in the TCK. And I would hope that the analysts would actually take up that, you know, that idea and clarify it, because I think there's a lot of vendors who look at DMN as a marketing label that they can slap on their product, do as little as possible to actually support it. And, you know, we need customers to really understand the difference between sort of fake DMN and real DMN, where the TCK really is the badge of real DMN. So has that value.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. That's really important. And by the way, it's not an exclusive club. We will invite anybody to join. And anybody, all of the stuff is available on GitHub, so you can access it, you know, without even needing to talk to us. And if you want to join the, you know, the weekly call, you're welcome to. So there's really no barrier to it. We really want all the vendors to be here participating.
And to your point, we also want end users contributing.
Thank you, and that's even better. Yeah, end users contributing keeps the vendors honest.
Just click on overview, and then you can show all the categories of test labels.
I'm sorry, say that again, louder.
Just click on overview, because then you can show all the categories that are being tested.
Okay. Oh, here's all the different label categories, right? And this is the 100% view, and then there's the by number view.
So it's really not only field, but really, you know, full compliance and full interoperability between vendors and folks. 'Cause, 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 'cause,
Anyone else? Okay, it looks like it's time to head up for lunch. Thank you.